Nidhi, please, over to you.
I'm Nidhi Bhargava. I'm an urban designer and presently working as a regeneration project manager with London Borough of Tower Hamlets. I've been born and brought up in India, and I've just come back from a visit to my home city, so I've brought along some pictures from there to share some issues, my thoughts on the issues which are generic. Thank you. I mean, the city is, it's slightly bigger in scale to medium-sized cities, but it faces the similar issues as medium-sized cities, so I thought it would be good to just bring along images from the city and, use them to present some of the issues in the public realm. Now, typically, we see a street cross-section here as a carriageway space, a footway, and then a private land ownership or public land ownership. But there's a clear definition of these three areas. Whereas in Indian context, you've got a carriageway, you've got a public / or private land ownership, a clear boundary, and then you've got a loosely defined space in between that provides for accommodates several different functions. So there's no clear definition on what that space is for. It could be, it accommodates your street furniture of lighting columns, electrical poles. You've got, like the current image, you'll see there's a shop, and outside there's some grit and sand also lying, so it's a temporary storage space. It provides for access to private areas. You've got the ramp extended, you've got the planting, you've got parking as well, you've got advertising. Throughout, the course of the day, the use of this space keeps changing, and it's another one is from a commercial area where you've got nicely done works, but like here, when you've got those works just ripped up for another service or utility work, the difference in scenario is that here they still get patched up sooner or later, but often in those cities, they just get left unattended, they're not repaved, and you're left with untidy, unleveled areas, for pedestrians. So it's pretty much, in one way, a roller coaster ride for pedestrians. So you don't have a defined pedestrian footway, good or bad in a way, but that's a fact. Another example where there were some recent works done, and there was an attempt to define certain uses. You could see some parking. If you see in the middle of the photograph, right next to the lighting column, you've got a raised footway. So that's an attempt of a footway, but you see that occupied by kiosks, and you've got the level differences, which allows people to go behind that footway and park in front. So there's a lot of space, but again, they are. You could put it down to design ignorance or slacks in the design process, that things like those are happening, which is not providing an efficient use of the space. Street clutter, I think, unlike here, where a lot of street clutter in the public realm is about redundant signages, sometimes, mainly redundant signages or lighting columns or, poor quality bins, etc. The street clutter over there is a lot about wiring, external exposed wiring, which is electrical or telecom wiring. It's about parking, of course. It's about a lot of ad hoc kiosks, hawkers, which are uncontrolled, not licensed. And another example where, again, all happening in that in-between space. So you still have a carriageway functioning, you still have private courtyards before the retail area or private houses, but that the in-between space loses its definition. And, a lot of the chaotic atmosphere just adds to the clutter. Going to the provision versus use, again, linking back to some of the points where I showed an earlier image, where some of the works have been done to tidy up the area. This is, again, another attempt where you see there's been new paving done, curbs put in to define the carriageway space and the space behind. But there's still an element missing where, the tidied up element is better than the other situation where you had all ripped up paving, etc. But again, the usage are not very strictly defined. I noticed recent signages over there, no vending zone or no parking zone, but they're not being enforced. They're not being, just followed through. So there are, again, kiosks and hawkers coming up everywhere. People stop and park anywhere because there are no enforcements. There are no traffic orders as such. An attempt to provide a segregated footway space. And again, the same issue. You've got hawkers coming up. So it just goes to say that not necessarily, a Western style of defined footway approach may work and provide the solution. It may depend upon the scenario. It may depend upon the situation. In this example, if you just look a bit on the deeper side of the picture, you've got greenery, and these are, along this particular road, you've got a series of nurseries, plant nurseries, which really create it's nice and green to see, but it creates really a walled edge. So the hawkers get the advantage, and there's not enough pedestrian movement along this route. So yes, you've got a raised footway, but you don't really have the footfall to cater to it, which in turn, allows other users to happen. Another example, this was a raised footway along a park. You've got ramped sides on it, which allows the motorbikes and bicycles to go up there. And, so instead of people walking on it, people are still, I don't have a picture showing the pedestrians, but they're actually alongside the road. And this area is just being used for parking. Another one, just to confirm that just a segregated footway may not be the option always. There was a recent initiative of putting up a few kilometers of cycle lanes. But you can just about see that some of the cyclists are there. And in the last year of my couple of visits over there, I've hardly seen one or two cyclists on those few kilometers of cycle lanes. All of them are outside, and it's no surprise that you've got issues like those along the cycle lanes. You've got columns, you've got trees, you've got hawkers in there as well. And at night time, there's a different activity going on. People are finding that as an enclosed area to just set there up, and it's being used as sleeping space. So all creative users. That's in front of, that's the main bus station in the city. And that's the reason why I picked this image, is just to highlight the fact that there's not enough thinking around placemaking yet. You don't really feel a sense of arrival. So apart from the fact that, a bus is there and a big signboard is there to indicate that that's your bus station, the area gets really busy. It's along the main route into the city from lots of other areas. It's also one of the main streets into the main shopping area of the town. And it all together, I think there's a need, with all these public realm scenarios, that how that's, what's the interface with the other users, and how it's what level of chaos it's adding to or not supporting to. Along this particular stretch of the road, you get loads of traffic jam just because the in and out movements from the area are just not supported by the space and by the layout of the area. This image and the one after I've picked up. This one is this is the main shopping area that I was just telling about, where the road in front of the bus station leads to. And the one after this is from the old city area. There's a clear contrast in the building-to-building line distances. And if you see in the new part of the city, they've got huge spans. But again, the layout, in between those, the layout between building to building is not clearly defined. So you've got a 5 times the space, but much more chaotic and much more organic in its nature, and whereas there's a lot of opportunity to utilize that additional space, because it's not all of it is being used as a carriageway space. It's only part of it. Rest of it is just, again, random parking, random users. Whereas if you look at the older city area, the space is already so tight that the ad hoc users are it controlled in its, in its layout itself. You don't have umpteen number of kiosks and umpteen number of hawkers gathering over there, and you've got limited amount of number of even cars entering the area. People just, are already discouraged because of the tightness in space. So maybe there's a food for thought that in any upcoming new settlements, whether there's a, thinking to be taken, ideas to be taken from the old style layouts. In terms of outdoor public spaces, a lot of images that I showed to you earlier, I don't know if you noticed, there wasn't any seating provision, there wasn't any resting place, there wasn't any element that would make you feel that there's some sort of plaza or a public space. A lot of, they're far and few, and whatever are there are part of a couple of sort of malls or private mall developments, and they're just as small plazas which open and close with the malls, because all these are gated areas. So you don't really have public access all the time to these open areas, and as it is, they're hardly there. It's just one or two. The image next to us on the right is outside the city. It was a very appreciated scheme along the riverside, and it's basically an open space theatre with the backdrop of the river, alongside with some provision for sports activities. I used that while studying. I used to go there and play badminton. I've attended a few music programs, etc. And it's to me, it's a good example of how there are opportunities with lots of these, small to medium cities. Quite a few of them have got such amenities like, a riverside. And it's not just about having everything in a city centre. You could look at other areas to explore where there could be a public space. This one is from another town, which is more of a medium-sized city. It's actually Mahatma Gandhi's birthplace, Porbandar. And I've picked this one up because it reflects some of the older historic city layouts where it was common to see a lane or an alleyway opening into a bigger open space, which perhaps provided for not only market areas, but also informal social activities or formal social activities. And the similarity I see with this and some of the town squares in village type settings here is that these have adapted to, again, provide for parking spaces. So maybe there's a thinking, required to see how these could be regained, or, the users could change over the course of the day. One of the key reasons I feel, I think for a lot of these issues in the city is the rural-urban migration, topped with poor administration, not to say, lack of responsibility and accountability of the local municipalities and local development authorities. There's corruption, which in turn results in cost cutting in some of these initiatives and poor workmanship as a result. There's an intrinsic nature of organic growth in all of these cities, which is good in a way because you don't have a lot of repetition, but it needs to be a bit controlled, and there needs to be a bit of enforcement on that organic growth. So there's a bit more organized nature to that growth. There's lack of regulations. There's lack of if there are regulations, there's lack of enforcement. The climate, of course, does a little bit of damage in terms of being hot and dry. And that together with the trend of new city layouts where you've got wider spaces, exposed mud areas aggravates that hot and dry and dusty environment in comparison to the older city areas where there's less space, still nicely tidied up in respect, in the sense that it's not as exposed, you don't have as much exposed mud. So again, some thoughts on what are the pluses and minuses to be seen in old versus new city layouts. Design negligence. The design process is not as. I'm talking more in terms of, again, the medium and small cities. The larger cities, you still have more regimental design processes, but the medium cities do suffer. and there are definitely untapped opportunities on utilizing some of these public realm and some natural resources, like solar power, etc. While we consider, improvements or enhancements of these cities, I think it's important to just bear in mind the different settings, which are not just about residential and commercial. You've got a combination of new versus old, as I mentioned, heritage, landmark, riverside opportunities, and transport hubs. Some lessons from the West, again, that links in. I personally, my view is that there's a lot that could be taken as guidance in terms of the regulatory practices, the licensing, the licensing practice, etc., and how there's this process of holding, some responsibility and accountability in the delivery of any of these projects. One thing I feel to be cautious of is often we get just drifted and overwhelmed by even the design practices, which may not necessarily always apply and be suitable to the Indian context. So as long as the methodologies and models and principles are taken, but incorporated in a more local context, and definitely there are lessons to be taken from within. Soumya touched upon some of the things, Swachh Bharat Mission, and there are other, good examples in other exemplary schemes happening in various cities that could be banked upon. I conclude with that on that note. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.